Here we are, part two of my World War II memories. One of the things that sticks in my mind that I've never seen talked about, and if you have any similar memory or any thoughts about it, please mention it in your comments. But at the end of the war, around 1945, it was called VE Day. There was VJ Day, was the victory on Japan that came a bit later, but VE Day was Victory in Europe Day. Now, what I remember so vividly was it was a nighttime, and one of these great big balloons went by to announce VE Day. And thinking back, I'm wondering, the balloon had lettering on the side, but it wasn't just written or something. It was electronic. I think it was like almost like a neon light, and it said "Victory VE Day." And I'm thinking to myself, well, what was this all about? I think in the war, in case the radios got knocked out, in case radio transmitters were not available, they had as an alternative method of communication these big balloons that could give messages with electric lights on them as an alternative news source. But as I say, I remember it, and I don't think my memory is faulty. But here's what I remember. This big balloon goes by announcing VE Day, and then it said, war with USSR. Of course, that was Russia in the old days, the Union of Soviet Republics. War with the USSR inevitable. It was like a telegraph style. War with, and then USSR. And I pretty well remember the word inevitable because as a kid I didn't know what inevitable meant. And I asked my dad, hey, what does that say? He says, inevitable. And I go, well, what's inevitable? Does that mean we're going to be in war next with the USSR? Well, I wasn't especially fearful. And by the way, the atomic bomb had not dropped yet. So we were not yet in the atomic age. Now this I remember now. Obviously I didn't even know there was such a thing as an atomic bomb in the works. Well, anyway, now I'm going to go back to my maybe first grade days and talk about life in the war. The food was quite different. We had, let me just tell you what we had to eat. My mother, and I regarded this as a treat, strangely enough. My mother would boil in water something called tapioca, which were little white, almost looked like grains. But when you boiled them in water, they would turn into maybe as big as your thumbnail, transparent ball. And then she would open a can of condensed Contadina tomato paste. And that would go in a different pan of boiling water. And then little bits of bacon. Yeah, bacon. Fried bacon was already fried and crisp. And then a lot of milk. And so I don't know what we called it. I think it was called tapioca milk soup. And that was a treat. I loved it. In fact, I'm going to make some of that for lunch today because I haven't had that in 75 years. And I remember my dad, he thought he was a gourmet cook, so he would make something special. And that was called milk soup. So he would boil some spaghetti in water, put some salt in it, forget olive oil. There was no olive oil during the war. Maybe a little butter once in a while. And then he would pour soup. Yeah, I used to have butter on top of the milk soup with spaghetti. And that was another of my favorite wartime lunches. We didn't really feel deprived or anything. It seemed like life was, normal is normal. Okay, now we had occasional interesting vegetables, like those green onions. Yeah, they're kind of long and green, and they're white and more oniony at the bottom. So here's what everybody had: Victory Gardens. There was Victory bicycles made out of the most flimsy metal you could get, and you had to have a special permit and a reason to get a permit to buy a Victory bike. But the Victory Garden, everybody had one. And you might have to walk a ways to some vacant lot or something, but you were actually assigned a little plot. And on that plot, you could grow any vegetable you wanted. Seeds were always available. And I can remember it was cabbages, lettuce, those green onions, and tomatoes. A lot of tomatoes. So Victory Garden, and then you would trade with your neighbors. If you had something that they liked, and another one was they didn't call it zucchini in those days. What did they call it in English?
Courgette.
Courgette, yeah, and spinach. So anyway, there was no shortage of vegetables, strangely enough, because of these Victory Gardens. Strangely enough, there was no shortage of not only vegetables, but cigarettes and booze. There was plenty of both. And I remember as a little kid, I'm talking, 5, 6 years old, my mom would send me down to the drugstore to buy cigarettes. I didn't need any note, and there was no restriction on little kids buying stuff like that, including booze, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But I remember very well, she liked Rawleys and Chesterfields. And one package was 30 cents. And in the package, I think there was 24, maybe even 36 cigarettes, but I think it was 24. So that made cigarettes roughly 1 penny each. And she would send me down to the store, and I remember the ads in those days seemed to talk about how healthy cigarettes were. I remember one ad said, "Always be sure to smoke a fresh cigarette." and one ad said, "It's a treat, not a treatment." But in any event, my dad would send me down for booze. Once again, little kid can go down to the store, grocery, and buy booze. Now the booze was crappy quality during the war, and I remember the brand, the only brand you could get was called Three Feathers, and that was kind of a whiskey or a bourbon or something, and that was what everybody drank if they wanted to get drunk. Then beer, well, you had plenty of good old beer, was plenty of that. But I do remember a lot of people bought something called near beer, which only had 2% alcohol instead of 4%, and that was cheaper. So once again, there was no shortage of cigarettes, booze, and we weren't starving. No, we were not starving at all. There was plenty to eat, although I remember this. Remember I told you about ration coupons in the last episode? Well, strangely enough, you could go to a restaurant and you didn't need ration coupons. So if you wanted a big steak, they were not cheap by any means. Well, by today's standards, I think a steak was $1. But $1 was big money, and anybody who left $1 tip had to be a millionaire. And I just was looking on the internet that almost everyone over 50 in the United States has a net worth in excess of $1 million. Now, of course, that's because just the average home is 500,000 to $1 million now. But when people talk about the coming collapse of the dollar, how could it, it's already collapsed. If a steak cost $1 in a first-class restaurant in those days, and now maybe closer to $100, the dollar has collapsed by 99%, hasn't it? So money was worth a lot more in World War II era. We're talking the 1940s than it is today. Oh, I do also remember the best. My dad was into real estate. He would buy old property, old houses, and fix them up, and either rent them out or sell them at a profit. But I remember him saying at the time, if you wanted a palace, fit for a king, you know how much it would cost in those days? I'm talking 20, 30 rooms, big, on a hill, a lot of land, $100,000. Well, imagine what that is today, like 500 million. I mean, it is the price of, well, obviously real estate in 1940 would have made you very rich if you held it. Well, everybody loves a happy Hollywood ending, but I'm going to end this news on a slightly sad, melancholy ending, because one of the things I remember very well from that era was that many mothers lost their sons in World War II. And once again, you never hear about this, but I remember very well, it was called the Gold Star Mother. When the mother got always a telegram delivered by Western Union. In the movies, it's Army officers who come to deliver the bad news. But I remember it wasn't Army officers, it was a telegram boy who had a special uniform, and he would, the only thing that telegrams came for 99% of the time was to announce the death in service of somebody. And when the telegram boy came to your house and knocked on the door, if you had a kid, you already knew that your kid was dead. And then in the mail came a little flag. It was about as big as this, and I remember it had a metal piece and a gold cord and a little tassel, and there was a big gold star. I think it was on a blue background, and women who lost their kid hung that in their window facing the street. And to be a Gold Star mother was made into sort of an honor, and people always expressed their sympathy. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your son. And that's the sad ending to our World War II memories.